"Ma'am, the dependent lounge is that way. We can find your son for you after the ceremony." The words, spoken with a placid and dismissive smile, hung in the formal air of the atrium. Mabel Jensen did not move. Her hands, clasped loosely in front of her, were steady. Her back, beneath the fine weave of her royal blue tweed jacket, remained as straight as it had been 40 years ago on the parade deck at Paris Island. Her long gray hair, pinned in a neat, elegant twist, caught the light filtering down from the high, vaulted ceilings of the National Museum of the Marine Corps. All around them, the history of the Corps was enshrined in steel, glass, and hallowed silence. The guard, a young man named Miller with a stiffly new uniform and an air of unearned authority, adjusted his belt. "It's just that this area is for the official party and distinguished visitors. It gets quite crowded." Mabel's eyes, a pale, clear blue that had seen sunrises over 3 different deserts, met his. "I have an invitation." Her voice was quiet, yet it carried, a finely tuned instrument designed for command, not conversation. She produced a heavy cardstock invitation from her handbag. Her son's name was printed on it, in elegant script: Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jensen. Miller took it, his gaze lingering on it for a moment too long, as if a woman of her age couldn't possibly read it correctly. "Right," he said, handing it back. "Like I said, the family seating is to the left, but the lounge is much more comfortable. Less standing." He was talking to her as if she were made of brittle china, a relic to be carefully placed on a shelf. "I am not looking for the lounge," Mabel said, her patience a deep, unshakable well. "I am looking for my seat." The second guard, an older man named Thompson with weary eyes, shifted his weight. "Miller, just check her name on the list." Miller's smile tightened. He clearly enjoyed the small kingdom of the doorway. He ran a finger down the guest manifest on his tablet. "Jensen. Jensen. Yes, here. Lieutenant Colonel Jensen, +1. Is your husband with you?" "No," Mabel replied. "Then you're the +1, Miller stated, as if solving a complex puzzle. "The seating for family is in Section 3. He pointed vaguely toward a cavernous wing filled with rows of chairs. "My invitation," Mabel said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the embossed eagle, globe, and anchor, "is for the distinguished visitor section. Row 1. Miller actually chuckled. It was a soft, condescending sound. "Ma'am, that's for the generals, the sergeant major of the Marine Corps, the official party." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper meant to convey kindness, but which dripped with patronage. "Sometimes the office sends out the wrong invitation template. It happens. Don't you worry about it. We'll find you a lovely seat where you can see everything." The humiliation was a slow, creeping cold. It wasn't the loud, explosive anger of a firefight. It was the quiet, grinding erosion of her identity. People were beginning to stare, Marines in their crisp dress uniforms, families in their Sunday best. They slowed as they passed, their curiosity piqued by the sight of 2 uniformed guards holding a polite elderly woman at bay. Mabel stood her ground. "There is no mistake. Please check your list again." "I have," Miller insisted, his tone hardening. "Now I need you to move aside. You're holding up the line." "I am not holding up the line," she corrected him, her voice losing none of its calm but gaining a distinct edge of steel. "You are." Thompson, the older guard, stepped forward. "Ma'am, let's not make a scene. It's your son's big day. We're just trying to follow our procedures." "Then follow them correctly," Mabel said. She opened her handbag again and produced a small leather wallet. From it she slid a laminated card, an identification card. Miller took it. He stared at the photograph, a much younger woman with the same clear eyes and determined jaw, her hair a darker shade, pulled back severely under a service cap. He looked from the photo to the woman in front of him, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He turned the card over. "This is an old one," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. "The design has changed twice since this was issued. It could be expired, or fraudulent." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Fraudulent. He was accusing her of fabricating an identity to get a better seat at her own son's ceremony. "It is a valid United States Uniformed Services identification card," Mabel stated. "It identifies me as a retiree. It does not expire." "Things change, sweetheart," Miller said, the endearment slipping out with a smirk. He was enjoying this now. He tapped his radio. "Dispatch. This is Guard Miller at the Semper Fidelis Memorial Chapel entrance. I have a situation. An elderly woman, possibly confused, presenting an expired ID, causing a bit of a scene." Mabel's gaze drifted past him, past the milling crowd, to the massive banners hanging from the ceiling. Banners depicting Iwo Jima, Chosin Reservoir, Kasan, places where men and women had been defined not by their age or their gender, but by their courage. As Miller spoke into his radio, her eyes fell to a small tarnished pin on the lapel of her jacket. It was a simple eagle, globe, and anchor, the kind an officer receives upon commissioning. It was worn smooth from years of being touched, a nervous habit. The cold metal felt like a phantom weight against her skin, and for a heartbeat, the polite murmur of the atrium faded, replaced by the low growl of an Amtrak engine and the smell of diesel and salt air. She was a young lieutenant again, standing on a pier in Morehead City, the humidity a thick blanket, the weight of her first command a platoon of logistical support Marines settling on her shoulders. Her company commander, a crusty old major, had pressed a pin just like this one into her palm. "Don't ever let them forget you earned this, Jensen," he'd grumbled. "Not just for you, for the ones who will come after you." The memory was as sharp and clear as the day it was made. "And she's refusing to move," Miller was saying into his radio, requesting guidance. The crowd was thicker now. The whispers were louder. A Marine captain, her hair in a tight bun just like Mabel's, hesitated nearby, a look of concern on her face. A few older men, their gaits stiff with age and old injuries, stopped and watched, their brows furrowed. One of them, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun and time, wore a small pin on his own civilian blazer that identified him as a master gunnery sergeant, retired. His name was Reyes. He had been a corporal in a motor transport battalion in the late 1980s. He squinted, his gaze fixed on Mabel. He saw the proud, unbowed posture. He saw the cool, appraising way she watched the guards, not with fear but with a sort of weary disappointment. He saw the set of her jaw, and then he saw the pin on her lapel. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by a wave of disbelief which quickly hardened into a cold, quiet fury. He didn't know her personally, not really, but he knew of her. Everyone from that era did. The woman they called the Iron Major long before she ever made colonel. The one who rerouted a whole supply convoy under fire outside Kuwait City. The one who as a young captain had faced down a port director in a foreign country who refused to offload Marine supplies because he wouldn't deal with a woman. Reyes didn't step forward. He didn't confront the guards. He was old enough to know that a direct assault was not always the most effective tactic. Instead, he faded back from the crowd, pulling out his cell phone. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed a number he hadn't called in years. "Sergeant Major," he said when the call was answered, his voice low and urgent. "It's Gunny Reyes. I'm over at the museum for Lieutenant Colonel Jensen's change of command. Sir, you are not going to believe what is happening at the main entrance." He paused, listening. "They have his mother, and they're about to throw her out." Another pause. Reyes's eyes narrowed. "Yes, sir. That Colonel Jensen, the legend." He listened for another moment. Then a grim smile touched his lips. "Yes, Sergeant Major. I think that would be appropriate. I'll stand by." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his gaze returning to the unfolding drama. The cavalry, he knew, was on its way. Inside the sprawling headquarters building of Marine Corps Base Quantico, Sergeant Major Thomas Armitage stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. The phone was still pressed to his ear. "Say that again, Gunny," he commanded, his voice a low growl that could peel paint. He listened, his knuckles white on the edge of his immaculate desk. "Civilian guards, expired ID, causing a scene." The words were an offense. He terminated the call without a goodbye and swiveled to his computer. His fingers, thick as sausages, flew across the keyboard. He pulled up the base's distinguished visitor protocol and the official manifest for the ceremony. Then he accessed the Marine Corps retiree database. Jensen, Mabel R. The file bloomed onto his screen, and the sergeant major went still. Rank Colonel, Riet Tremary Mas, 0402. Logistics Officer Service, 1978 to 2008. A long list of deployments, commendations, and duty stations scrolled down the page. Beirut, 1983. Panama, 1989. Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, 1990 to 1991. Battalion Command, G4 at a MEF level. War College. The list of personal awards was just as long. Legion of Merit, Bronze Star Medal, Meritorious Service Medal with 2 gold stars. Sergeant Major Armitage felt a hot flush of shame, followed by a cold tide of rage. Mabel Jensen wasn't just any colonel. She was a godmother to an entire generation of logistics officers. She had quite literally written the book on expeditionary logistics that they were still using. She had kicked down doors for women in the Corps when they were still made of steel and prejudice. He stabbed the intercom button on his desk. "Gunny," he barked, speaking to his administrative chief. "Get me the base commander on the line. Now." He didn't wait for a reply. "And get a detail from Marine Barracks, Washington. I want 6 of your sharpest Marines. Full dress blues, white gloves, rifles. I want them formed up at the museum entrance in 10 minutes. Move." There was a squawk of "Aye, Sergeant Major" from the intercom, and then the sound of chairs scraping and feet moving with extreme prejudice. The sergeant major stood, grabbing his own cover from its stand. The honor of the Corps had been insulted. A debt was about to be paid. Back at the museum, Miller had reached the end of his tether. His authority had been questioned by an old woman in front of a growing audience, and he was not about to back down. "That's it," he said, his voice rising. "Ma'am, I am giving you a final warning. You will remove yourself from this entrance, or I will be forced to have you escorted from the property." He took a step closer, his hand moving toward her elbow. He was actually going to physically remove her. "These credentials are too old to be valid. You probably don't even remember the current procedures for base access. This is for your own good." It was the final unforgivable insult. He wasn't just dismissing her service, he was weaponizing her age, suggesting she was senile, a frail and confused creature who needed to be managed. Mabel didn't flinch. She simply looked at the hand reaching for her arm. "I would advise you," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout, "to reconsider that course of action." It was at that precise moment that the great glass doors behind her swung open with a hydraulic hiss. The murmur of the crowd died instantly, replaced by a sudden collective intake of breath. 6 Marines filled the doorway. They were impossibly tall, impossibly straight, their dress blue uniforms a symphony of midnight blue, blood red and gleaming gold. White belts and gloves were stark against the dark wool. At their shoulders they carried M1 Garand rifles, their stocks polished to a mirror sheen. They moved as one organism, their polished black shoes striking the marble floor with a single thunderous clap that echoed through the atrium. They weren't marching fast, but with a deliberate, inexorable cadence that spoke of absolute power. Leading them was Sergeant Major Armitage. His face was a thundercloud, his eyes fixed on Mabel. Miller and Thompson froze, their mouths slightly agape. They looked like statues, a tableau of foolishness and surprise. The 6 Marines flowed around Mabel, forming a perfect honor guard, 3 to each side, their movements sharp and economical. They executed a flawless flanking maneuver and came to a halt, creating a formal corridor with Mabel at its head. Then, as one, they brought their rifles to the order arms position, the metal butt plates cracking against the marble with a sound like a gunshot. Sergeant Major Armitage took 3 more steps and stopped 2 feet in front of Mabel. He was a mountain of a man, his chest covered in a rainbow of service ribbons. He looked at the 2 security guards, his gaze lingering on Miller's hand, still hovering near Mabel's arm. Miller snatched it back as if he'd been burned. Then the sergeant major turned his full attention to Mabel. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He raised his right hand in a salute so sharp, so precise it seemed to slice the air. "Colonel Jensen," his voice boomed, filling the sudden profound silence of the atrium. "My sincere apologies for the delay in your escort. We stand ready to see you to your seat." He held the salute, his eyes locked on hers. A collective gasp went through the crowd. "Colonel." The word ricocheted off the marble walls. Miller's face went from ruddy to bone white. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Thompson looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Slowly, gracefully, Mabel returned the salute. It was a gesture she had not made in years, but muscle memory was a powerful thing. Her hand was as steady as the sergeant major's. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," she said. "Your timing is impeccable." She dropped her hand and he dropped his. He then turned his head slightly, his eyes still fixed forward, but his voice now directed at the 2 petrified guards and the entire assembled crowd. He spoke with the clear, carrying cadence of a drill instructor on the grinder. "For the education of everyone present," he began, his voice dripping with ice, "you are in the presence of Colonel Mabel Jensen, United States Marine Corps, retired." He paused, letting the ranks settle over the room. This officer was commissioned in 1978, when there were fewer than 1,500 women officers in the entire Marine Corps. She was one of the first women to command a logistics battalion. When she was a first lieutenant in Beirut in 1983, she coordinated the medical evacuation of wounded Marines from the barracks bombing. As a captain during Operation Just Cause in Panama, she kept supplies moving to forward units under enemy fire. During Desert Storm as a major, her logistical planning was directly responsible for the successful sustainment of the 1st Marine Division's historic armored push into Kuwait. A wave of murmurs swept through the audience. Young Marines, men and women alike, stood straighter, their eyes wide with awe. They were not just looking at an old woman, they were standing before a living piece of their own history, a legend they had only read about in professional journals. The sergeant major's voice never wavered. "She is the recipient of the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star Medal for meritorious service in a combat zone, and has trained and mentored thousands of Marines, including more than a few of the general officers who are here today. The son she is here to honor, Lieutenant Colonel Jensen, learned what it means to be a Marine at her knee. He finally turned his gaze, a laser of pure, unadulterated fury, onto Miller. Your job is security. You failed. Your procedure is to verify, not to assume. You saw gray hair and a tweed jacket, and you assumed weakness. You saw a woman of advanced years, and you assumed confusion. You confused age with irrelevance. That failure is not only a profound insult to this officer and everything she represents, it is a failure to uphold the very standards of the institution you are paid to protect. You are a disgrace. Miller flinched as if struck. Before the silence could become too heavy, Mabel spoke. Her voice was calm and measured, but it cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. She wasn't looking at the guards. She was looking at the young Marines in the crowd, the ones whose corps she had helped to build. The sergeant major is correct, she said. Standards are all we have. But the lesson here is not about punishment. It is about perception. The uniform changes, the hair goes gray, the body slows down, but the Marine inside does not. Do not soften your standards, but you must apply them fairly, to everyone, regardless of their age, their gender, or the style of their coat. Experience does not expire with youth. Gray hair does not mean you've gone soft. More often than not, it means you've survived things that broke other people. Her hand instinctively went to the small EGA pin on her lapel, and for a final fleeting second, the image in her mind was of a sand-swept command tent near the Kuwaiti border. The air was thick with the metallic taste of fear. The first reports of Scud missile launches were coming in. She was a major then, headset on, calmly and decisively issuing orders to young Marines whose faces were pale in the green glow of the chemical lights, her voice a steady anchor in a sea of chaos. She was in command. She had earned her place. The spell was broken by the arrival of her son, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jensen, his face a mask of confusion and concern that quickly morphed into understanding, pride, and a deep, simmering anger at the guards. He strode to his mother's side. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What happened?" "A procedural misunderstanding, Michael," she said, patting his arm. "The sergeant major has handled it." Sergeant Major Armitage stepped forward. "Sir, we're here to escort the colonel to her seat." Michael Jensen looked at the honor guard, at the sergeant major, and at his mother, standing tall and serene in the center of it all. He nodded, his eyes shining. "Thank you, Sergeant Major." With a crisp command, the sergeant major set the detail in motion. The 6 Marines performed a flawless sequence of rifle movements, shouldering their arms and turning to form a formal honor cordon. They escorted Colonel Mabel Jensen with her son at her side through the stunned crowd and to her seat in the front row. The ceremony began, but for many in attendance, the main event had already happened. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and decisive. The private security firm's contract was placed under immediate review. The 2 guards, Miller and Thompson, were reassigned pending a full investigation. Sergeant Major Armitage himself oversaw the creation of a new training module for all base personnel, military and civilian, on proper veteran identification protocols, with a specific block of instruction on avoiding age and gender bias. An initiative was launched, spearheaded by Mabel's story, to connect pioneering women veterans with the current generation of female service members. About a week later, Mabel was in the base commissary, picking out groceries. As she rounded an aisle, she saw a familiar figure, the young guard, Miller. He was out of uniform, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and he looked profoundly miserable. When he saw her, he froze, his face flushing with shame. He hesitated, then walked toward her, his head down. "Ma'am," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Colonel, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. What I did was, there's no excuse. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. I'm so sorry." Mabel looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. She saw not a monster, but a young, foolish man who had been given a little bit of authority and had let it poison him. She saw someone who had learned a very hard, very public lesson. She gave him a small, tired smile. "I once had a young lance corporal," she said, her voice soft. "He hot-fueled a Humvee and nearly burned down an entire motor pool. Panicked, made a terrible decision. I thought his career was over." Miller looked up, confused. "I dressed him down in front of his entire platoon," she continued. "Then I took him aside, and I told him that every Marine is entitled to one truly colossal mistake. Just one. What defines them is not the mistake, but what they build from the ashes." He stayed in, retired as a master sergeant, one of the best I ever knew. She placed a carton of eggs in her cart. "You've had your colossal mistake, young man. The question is, what are you going to build from it?" He stared at her, speechless, a flicker of something new dawning in his eyes. It was not the fear of authority or the shame of being caught. It was the first glimmer of understanding. Mabel simply nodded, then pushed her cart down the aisle, leaving him standing there in the quiet hum of the commissary's freezers, a lone figure at the start of a long and perhaps better road. Mabel Jensen's story is a powerful reminder that heroes do not have an expiration date, and valor is not confined to a specific age or gender. If you believe in honoring the quiet strength of veterans like her, please like this video, subscribe to She Chose Valor, and share her incredible story.